im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav, dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Svjetska zdravstvena organizacija. Sigurno ste čuli da su se zemlje svijeta, članice Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije, složili oko novog ugovora, takozvanog Treaty-a, i da će biti potpisan u svibnju ove godine na 78. Generalnoj skupštini Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije, koja će biti između 19. i 27. svibnja. Što smo se složili? Što ćemo to potpisati, što nas očekuje je današnja tema i razgovarat ću sa gospodinom koji to prati godinama i koji je prava osoba da vam objasni na što su se to naši autoriteti složili, pristali i što nas očekuje u budućnosti u slučaju izvanrednih situacija od međunarodnog značaja. Moj današnji gost je gospodin James Roguski. Hello, Mr. Roguski, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
It's pleasure. Well, tell me your background, just for people from Croatia who doesn't know you.
Well, I have spent about half of my life focused on natural health and written a couple of books in regards to that. But for the last 3 years, a little bit more, I've been reporting on the negotiations that have been going on with the WHO, both for the amendments to the international health regulations, which were originally submitted by the United States, and a separate document, the proposed pandemic agreement, which is close, to potentially being adopted when the World Health Assembly meets at the end of May, I believe May 19th to the 27th.
Well, we need to explain to people how everything started in 2021 and where we are now. I had a few shows about this topic, but that was a few months ago. And things has changed, and now it seems to that most of the member countries agreed to sign the new treaty. Can you explain in short sentence where we were before and where we are now?
Well, I'm going to start by saying something that will probably surprise you and surprise most of your viewers. It would be best if you absolutely knew nothing about what was going on, because the vast majority of all of the information that people have heard about this entire fiasco, about COVID, about the amendments, about the WHO, about the pandemic agreement, it's been misinformation, not just from the mainstream media, but from the alternative media as well. And so you really have to go way back to early 2021, when the United States first, finished their Operation Warp Speed and rolled out what they call vaccines to the world. And so what was supposed to happen was the vulnerable individuals, the emergency personnel, frontline, doctors and nurses, maybe elderly people and so forth around the world, were supposed to be the first people to receive these injections, under the assumption that the injections were actually beneficial. Well, that's not what happened. What happened was the wealthy nations, I'll use Canada as an example, signed enormous contracts for, like 10 jabs per person. Canada specifically ordered 400 million injections for their population of 40 million people. So what happened in the middle of 2021 was that relatively poor nations did not get any of the drugs or the jabs or the testing equipment or the ventilators or remdesivir or any of these things, and they started grumbling, and they literally referred to what was going on as vaccine apartheid. The wealthy nations were keeping all of these, I think they're all poisons, but they were keeping all of these, health-related products to themselves, and the poor nations realized that they didn't have the capacity to manufacture these products or even obtain them via contract. And they complained And that is why the negotiations started on December 1st, as you mentioned. They called for a special session of the World Health Assembly. And this is why the negotiations started. So the negotiations have never been about lockdowns or mandates or setting up the World Health Organization as a one world government to tell your nation what they must do. It has always been that the WHO wanted to be in charge of the money flowing through the WHO to build what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex all around the world. The lesson that they learned is not the lesson that I learned. I learned that the drugs and the testing and the equipment and the, quote unquote vaccines did more harm than good. But what they learned was that big pharma was not big enough. They did not have the capacity to inject, this poison into 8 billion people, and they needed to build more factories and distribution and logistics and storage capacity. And these agreements are a corrupt business deal. They are not what most people have been saying they are.
Okay. Well, now we are here after 4 years. And we have some agreement. What is different between first suggestion of the agreement and present situation? What, as I said in the start, most of the member states agreed to sign?
Well, most of it is exactly what they sought out to get. I think all of the parties are probably a little bit disappointed because what you're looking at is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And way back in 2022, at a meeting of the B20, and this is not the government, G20, the top 20 economies, but on the B20, all the business leaders, the Indonesian health minister was talking about a related issue that the United States was doing through the World Bank, through the pandemic fund. And he said, there's billions of dollars going to be run through this pandemic fund. And he told the audience, go invest. This is a spectacular business opportunity. And so you have to erase whatever it is you think you know. This is a corrupt business deal designed to funnel money through the WHO to be determined by what they will now, if it is adopted and nations sign on to it, it really should be called the Framework Convention for Pandemic Preparedness, Prevention, and Response. Now, if that rings a bell, you might be thinking of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so what they hope to set up, for the nations to participate in this agreement is a brand new bureaucracy that would meet on a yearly basis at a conference of the parties. They abbreviate that COP. And so with the Framework Convention for Climate Change, they have met year after year after year. And at this point, they're looking to get $1 trillion a year to funnel through this new bureaucracy for climate change. And this is very much the same idea for pandemic preparedness and response. Well, they haven't done anything to fix climate change, and they're not going to because it's all a scam. And what they hope to do is set up this corrupt organization to meet on a yearly basis to get more and more money from governments and banking institutions and organizations to funnel into building more manufacturing plants for mRNA vaccines or PCR tests or more drugs or equipment or whatever it may be. And they'll dole out those contracts to their local cronies, their friends, and profit enormously from people's health problems. It's far more likely that what we're going to face is a biological weapons arms race, because what they want to do is fund the search for pathogens with pandemic potential so that they can bring them into their laboratory network and turn that into money by then handing that over through their pathogen access and benefit sharing system. Companies see this as a gold mine. They want poor nations to go find problems that they can profit from. Now, even though the United States, officially, the government has started the year-long process to exit the WHO, and we stopped participating in the negotiations for the agreement, the United States could still sign the agreement if they, pulled a fast one. But all of the pharmaceutical corporations that may be based in the United States but are multinational, they can certainly still participate. And the United States, President Trump, has not said one word about the amendments to the international health regulations that were adopted on June 1st. And there hasn't been any word that we as a nation are leaving the agreement, which is separate, the international health regulations. And so there's just a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation about what's really going on. If you just look at all of this for what it is, in my view, it's a corrupt business deal. And the tyranny that we suffered through the past 5 years did not come from the WHO. It came from your local government, whether it's a city, a county, a province, or your nation. The draconian measures that were implemented were not ordered by the WHO. They do not have authority. Your nation is sovereign. Your people are sovereign. Your own governments did to you whatever they did, and they're trying to blame the WHO for making them do it. Well, the WHO only has the authority to make suggestions, and they use this as an excuse. One group blames the other, and they all want to say that the other person, the other group made me do this, made me do that. The tyranny always happens locally. The WHO wants to set up a racketeering mafia, logistics, research, development, manufacturing, distribution, organized crime. This is what they're setting up to make it so that more and more fear can be generated and more profit can be made by claiming, oh, we have the solution for the very thing that they are trying to make us afraid of.
I had an interview with Sasha Latipova, and the topic was that COVID-19 was military operation. And we showed the audience documents, pre-packed and other documents, which shows that really that was military operation, and it was started in the United States, because behind this is Department of Defense. And now we have official, we can say official, statement that gain of function produced this virus, and it was lab leak from Wuhan laboratory. What is your comment on this?
In general, the way propaganda seems to work, is there is an official narrative and there is an official counter narrative. And then there's the truth. And so, the official narrative for the past 5 years was, it was a zoonotic leak, from a wet market. Somebody had some bat soup or whatever the story was. And, now the official counter narrative has been accepted and is being put out. In short, that's all propaganda. In my view, what happened was the pharmaceutical industry murdered people in the hospital, and they put out a biological weapon claiming that it was a vaccine. So let's talk about both of those two things. The hospital protocols that were used in the United States. Now, every nation, maybe their medical establishment did slightly different things. They told everyone there's nothing you could do. Right? Absolutely nothing you could do. If you get so sick that you feel you have to go to the hospital, wait until you're on death's door, show up at the hospital. Then what they might have done is given high flow oxygen, which damages the lungs. Now, you've got someone with a respiratory problem, and what they gave are drugs that stop and make it so that the person is unable to breathe naturally, so that they can do it mechanically by shoving a tube down their throat with a ventilator. Then they put them on what I call remdesivir. The official name is remdesivir, which has been shown very clearly to damage the kidneys, causing fluid to build up in the lungs, and the person died not because of COVID, but because of the hospital protocols. Then the solution for everyone else was, get a PCR test. Well, just that phrase is fraudulent. the PCR process is a very, unique and interesting Nobel Prize-winning process. It has its function in laboratory work, but it absolutely, positively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, cannot diagnose dis-ease. And so healthy people, if they wanted to go to work or go to an event or travel or, just live their life, they were forced to have, basically assault and battery. Sticking something up someone's nose in this direction is wrong. It's supposed to be put in that direction. A lot of times damage was done. People were harmed, but it's all fraudulent. What they did was get genetic information for various purposes. There's lawsuits to that regard, which, I just spoke to one of the lawyers the other day. That got healthy people to give in to say, oh, I have an asymptomatic dis-ease. Now, that is just ridiculous. But they did a lot to try to convince people about that. And they said, well, the solution is to inject this biological weapon, the mRNA vaccine, not just once, not twice, not 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's why Canada bought 10 for every Canadian. This is not a vaccine. It did not stop transmission. It did not stop infection. It has increased the rate that people get diagnosed with COVID, and the side effects are absolutely astonishing. Thousands upon thousands, some people say millions of people have died by what they call a covered countermeasure. Now, you mentioned the PrEP Act and Sasha Latypova. I'd be happy to talk about that. It might not mean anything directly for your audience outside the United States, but your nation probably has done very similar things to provide immunity from lawsuits and liability for the people in government and the medical establishment who essentially committed crimes in what is, in my view, biological warfare. The correct term, I believe, is democide. Our own government did things that ultimately resulted in the death of their own people, and they want to blame the WHO and China for the things that they did. And while the WHO and China are certainly not, doing things wonderfully well, that's doing many things that I completely and totally disagree with, the blame game is pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic.
Okay, what is now new treaty? What says inside? Let's imagine there is a new pandemic. Better say emergency situation of international concerns. Let's imagine new pandemic. According to the new agreement, what will be obligation of each country in a new situation?
Let me answer that question by first going back a little bit in time, because most people, unfortunately, have ignored the amendments to the international health regulations that were adopted on June 1st of last year, 2024. A lot of people wrongly claimed victory because the WHO did pass the amendments, but they did not reach agreement on the pandemic agreement. A lot of people call it a treaty. And so that's what's coming up now. So there's these two separate things, but a lot of very important things happened back in June. And many people are very confused on the procedures about the amendments to the international health regulations. In short, the World Health Assembly adopted them, I think fraudulently, and there's arguments to that regard, but they believe that they adopted amendments on June 1st. It took them quite a while to officially notify all of the nations. So they didn't actually notify the nations officially until September 19th of 2024. And so every nation has 10 months, which will take you to July 19th of this year, 2025. The leader of your nation, your head of state around the world, whether it is president, prime minister, may he rest in peace. Pope Francis just passed away, but the head of state of the Vatican, the Holy See, has, whoever they choose, will have until July 19th to reject those amendments. Now, it's not a foregone conclusion. Every nation can reject them. And in 2022, 4 nations did reach the amendments that were adopted in 2022. And so what is in those amendments is very important. you mentioned the public health emergency of international concern, um, and I have seemed to have frozen up. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, yes, I hear you. Don't worry.
Yep, can you hear me still? I hope.
Yes,
Okay.
I hear you.
And so, what they agreed to, the most important aspect that was in those amendments, is just about identical in this pandemic agreement, is all about financing. There's a saying, that we have in the U.S., and I don't know if it translates worldwide, but if you follow the money, you'll usually find the crime. And so, in the amendments to the international health regulations, they agreed to what they call a coordinated financing mechanism. And pretty much the same thing is being agreed to in the pandemic agreement. And it just drives home the fact that what they want to do is they want all of the poor nations around the world to be searching everywhere possible for new pathogens. Not new pandemics, but new pathogens that have pandemic potential, whether they're looking at poultry operations or dairy farms or wastewater treatment or septic systems or wherever they might look, hospitals and so forth. They want nations to spend billions of dollars using the PCR process fraudulently to claim that they have found this new and frightening pathogen to bring into their laboratory network and start up this pathogen access and benefit sharing system. They want to find more pathogens to come into the laboratory, maybe do gain of function, but I don't think that's really the point. The point is there are billions of dollars to be made for testing equipment to then test everyone around the world fraudulently to make it seem like there is a pandemic. What we had is a case-demic where the fraudulent use of the PCR blew way out of proportion what wasn't really very much different than the normal yearly, influenza seasonal problems that people have. The problem was then people were confused. They were brought into hospitals, treated with additional poison. And it was that was really the danger and the harm. And so these two agreements, the amendments to the international health regulations and the pandemic agreement, are very similar. What you want to look at are the fact that it's not got anything to do with health. In the pandemic agreement, they talk about pandemic related products, and they refer to the definition in the international health regulations, but they don't give you a link. So most people are not going to go back and find it. The only thing that they think is appropriate for dealing with what they want to call an outbreak or a pandemic emergency or whatever it may be are drugs and jabs and medical devices and gene altering therapies. They added that into the list for both of these agreements. So this is just giving money to big pharma so that profits can be made not just in the United States and Europe and maybe Australia where there's manufacturing capacity. Everyone around the world wants a piece of the pie. They want some of the profit to be made from pandemic emergencies, from public health emergencies of international concern or fakes. They want to be able to scare people and then have contracts in place and products in distribution warehouses, because it's very hard for national leaders to force people to do whatever it is they want to do, wear a mask, take a test, do a jab, if they don't have the infrastructure to have those products in supply. They learned that big pharma couldn't reach poor nations, and the poor nations, the leaders and the business leaders, realized that they missed out on billions of dollars worth of profit. So they want money from wealthy nations like European nations, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, to flow through the WHO to help finance a massive build out of big pharma. So if you think drugs and jabs and PCR, tests are wonderful, then you'll probably love the pandemic agreement. If you think that those things were used to harm people, then this is an absolute catastrophe. And so the process by which the agreement will, reach fruition from their point of view, the negotiators have basically said, yes, we have an agreement that we're basically, they've agreed to it. There's still a lot of details to be worked out. The text is a little bit of a mess, but they've come to the conclusion that they're done negotiating. So May 19th to the 27th, all of the delegates from around the world will meet in Geneva, and they'll probably have a very just simple, not a vote per se, like they're not going to all say yay or nay and have it recorded. They're likely to do what they call consensus, which is to say they'll just have everyone in the room and say, okay, we're all in agreement that, we're going to adopt this new text, and they'll slam the gavel and it will be agreed upon. Then it's highly likely that they will have a signing ceremony. And if your national leader, president, prime minister, king, queen, whatever it may be, has given instructions to the delegates to sign on to the agreement, if your parliament or government protocols don't require anything further than that, then every nation is likely to sign on. The European Union is likely to sign on as a bloc, and the money deal will go into effect 30 days later if they get 60 nations to sign on. So there's still time to oppose it, but unfortunately, most people are so confused. They think it's something that it isn't. But there is absolutely still time to let your national leaders know that you don't want, your money to be going to be building out big pharma's infrastructure to poison more people around the world.
Well, it looks like one big global business model. And when you mentioned some things, I had the interviews, and one of my guests said, if you are looking for pathogen, for sure you'll find it. And also I can confirm when you said that they killed people with protocols. I saw a paper from Great Britain. When they see this excess mortalities in 2020 came from irregular uses of midazolam and morphine, not because of virus or COVID-19 disease. That means all what you're saying, everybody can go through and confirm it. Just one more very important thing, and now we are coming to conclusion that they will agree, but nobody was really investigate what was happening during pandemic and what was role in WHO. And for that purpose, I would like to show that US government just published one document. That's investigation from subcommittee from House of Representatives in the US. I have to say it's a Biden administration, and it was published on the 4th of December 2024. But just a few days ago, it was published on the official sites. And inside of these documents, we will not go through all of this, but there is a part when they are saying something about WHO, and they said that response from WHO was very bad. Let me just read to everybody. They said, World Health Organization response to the COVID-19 pandemic was an abject failure because it caved to pressure from the Chinese Communist Party and placed China's political interests ahead of its international duties. Further, the WHO newest effort to solve the problem exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic via pandemic treaty may harm the United States. And that was official reason why United States leaving WHO. Just one example, but nobody before they decided to sign was really make analyzation what was role of WHO during last pandemic. And now we are already in front of possible new one or any kind of emergency situation of international concerns.
This is a complicated question, but for the most part, I mentioned earlier, there's the narrative and the counter narrative. And what you're really dealing with is propaganda. And so, interestingly enough, back in 2022, when I first started dealing with this, I was very surprised, and a lot of the people that were following the information that I was putting out were very surprised when we learned that the call for making WHO have more power, okay, came from what they call a minority report from the Republican Party during Trump's first administration. So you can see how the information is manipulated. I'll repeat what I just said. The original amendments that were proposed by the United States, the trigger that started that was a minority report by the Republican Party saying that they wanted to strengthen the WHO and give it more authority. Now, you have to look at how everything went after that and realize that what you hear governments say is rarely the truth. And so, the Congressional Committee and their report on the COVID-19 response claims that Operation Warp Speed was just the greatest, accomplishment known to mankind. And the vaccines saved millions of lives. And they never questioned anything that the United States government did in terms of, rolling out these biological weapons on its own people. Now, everyone wants to point blame, and there's plenty of blame to go around, but the truth is somewhere else. And so what you're looking at with these negotiated documents is really setting up a biological weapons arms race. The Defense Department and the CDC and all of the pharmaceutical companies in the United States are running billions of dollars through the World Bank Pandemic Fund to build laboratories and investment in manufacturing capacity around the world. The WHO and all of the other nations are now going to start doing the same thing. So what you have are two competing forces saying, we realize that there's billions of dollars to be made in profit, and we can try to control our population through fear by looking for pathogens, bringing them into the laboratory, making billions of dollars off of tests that are fraudulent, manufacturing some kind of drug and whatever. And the law says that the only products that governments can invest in are pharmaceutical products. There's no discussion about vitamins or minerals or any kind of natural healing modalities. Those are all being kicked to the side. And what is going on with these agreements is, quite frankly, fascism. It's government, corporations, and now there's a new third leg in the traditional fascism, which are all of these foundations that they call relevant stakeholders. There were 400 organizations that were allowed to participate in these negotiations, and they all have, there's a line in the coordinated financing mechanism where it essentially says that those organizations are going to get a lot of money from this coordinated financial mechanism. They all want this agreement to go through because they stand to profit from it. And so whatever you hear your government say, whatever you hear the WHO say, take it with the proverbial grain of salt. It's, maybe has a little grain of truth in it, but for the most part, it's propaganda. This is a business deal to make a bunch of money off of other people being afraid, being poisoned, and being sick, and not having any choice because their government is in bed with Big Pharma.
Well, it looks like, to me, plan for depopulation, and I heard lots of statements like this during my show, that global organization thinking that there is too many people in the world and we need to depopulate the world. And now we have for sure results from it, because in Europe, where we are, we have decreasing of population, and everybody said there's some other reasons, but fact is that there is less and less Europeans in Europe and more other people. And it seems to that they are replacing our citizens in Europe. But let me ask you, in case of future pandemic or anything like this, what will be obligations from the side of states Is there any obligation that will be done by WHO and transferred to the states, or we as a states has an independent right to decide how to deal with pandemic?
The latter thing that you said, right? Nations have always had the ability to tell the WHO, thank you very much for your recommendation, but no thank you. And so what a lot of nations have tried to do is turn that around and say, well, the WHO recommended this. Well, originally, the WHO recommended against remdesivir. But the United States, cornered the market and poisoned millions of our own people. And so now, I am absolutely not a fan of the WHO. I think they should be taken off of, disappear from the face of the planet for a couple of very simple reasons. I haven't seen their financials, their latest one yet. They may be out, but I haven't seen them yet. But last year, out of their approximately $4 billion budget, 30% of it went for salaries. They had like 8,000 people earning $130,000 a year. It's just a big grift. It's just corruption. They pay a lot of people to push a lot of paper, do studies and tell everybody else in the world what they think. But, if you took those billions of dollars and actually improved the nutrition of the people who were ill, and you did the things that actually made people better, the world would be a better place if the WHO disappeared and all of that money actually was given, to help people who are suffering and need the proper treatment. But they are totally in bed with the pharmaceutical industry and all of these foundations that profit from it, because about 20 years ago, the way the WHO was funded changed dramatically. Now, a lot of people have been talking about how, the United States leaving the WHO has taken away, a lot of their money. But people need to understand it's not because of the required yearly dues or fees that the U.S. was paying. The U.S. was voluntarily donating hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars more than we were obligated to pay. We gave way more money than China gave. Now, Europe and Germany and other nations paid a lot of money. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and many other organizations have donated hundreds of millions of dollars to the WHO. And it's not to support the WHO. They gave that extra money specifically with directives on how to spend that money. So the WHO has been corrupted and controlled, not by the CCP, but by whomever gave the hundreds of millions of dollars and directed the WHO to use that money to fund whatever their project was that they then profited from. And so people have a misunderstanding about the WHO. It has, for the last 20 years, been completely corrupted by the organizations and the nations who donate extra money. And if anybody wanted to argue that, who controlled the WHO, it has always been the United States and the European Union. And with these negotiations, if you were to track how these negotiations were handled, it's very clear that the European Union and maybe the UK were completely in charge of how these negotiations were run. They were not run in an honest and fair, diplomatic way. And so what has ultimately been, at this point settled on, still to be adopted, is exactly what the European financial institutions and pharmaceutical industry wanted. They want control of their intellectual property, and they want money to be flowing to build out their industry. And they're going to expand into Africa and Southeast Asia and everywhere else around the world, South America, because they did not have the infrastructure to profit in those relatively poor nations.
There's one more thing that they want to control all the time is information. Well, we were witnessing censorship, still witnessing. For example, I was deplatformed from YouTube because I said something what is not according the policy of WHO. And still, if you say something against this, you will be deplatformed from YouTube and also TikTok and LinkedIn. That means social media are censoring. And the new treaty, new agreement, they want to have exclusivity about information about health, and not only health. We have to say this, that climate changes are also subject of this emergency situation of international concerns.
If you actually read the documents, there's maybe a sentence. And so that has been overblown. But let me point out again what we're dealing with, and very specifically in the United States. In other nations, it's not quite so crystal clear. In the United States, our Bill of Rights, First Amendment, we have the freedom of speech, and Congress can pass no law, and the federal government cannot restrict us from saying whatever it is we care to say. But what they have done is they have entered into secret agreements. This is essentially the definition of fascism. When government and corporations work together against the people, that's fascism. And so what they did, and it's violation of everything that our nation is supposed to stand for, is they coerced these social media companies to restrict speech on their platform because there aren't appropriate laws to govern how that is handled, and it has been abused. So if you think about it, if someone were to want to come onto your channel and your show and wanted to say something that was horrific as far as you were concerned, you would simply not invite them to be on your show. And so when you're looking at social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, people have a business agreement with their account with those platforms, and that has been used abusively to restrict our freedom of speech. It's a way around, the limitations that our government has. Now, in Europe and UK, they have passed outrageous laws. You have to blame your local government. Your local government then wants to say, "Oh, the WHO made us do it." Well, no, it's your, municipal, provincial, state, national government that are implementing these laws. They play this game where, one side says, "Oh, I recommend this," and the other side does something horrific, and they go, "Well, they told us to do it." It's a game that they play upon the people, and every nation is structured a little bit differently. It's really your national governments that want control over you, and they've all agreed, to have this central source of information. But when they implement it, it's the local, friends and neighbors, people who are in the police force or whatever it may be. There aren't going to be WHO or United Nations military, knocking on your door. It's going to be your neighbor or your local police or your local health bureau, health ministry, whatever they call it. It's your friends and families and your fellow countrymen who implemented these harsh draconian rules over the past 5 years, and they're more than likely to do it again if you allow them to get away with it.
Let's imagine that you are Prime Minister of Croatia and you know all that. What would you do if you want to keep sovereignty of your country?
It's not a question of sovereignty. This is what everyone has been confused about. This is a business deal. Do you want your money to flow through the WHO to go and make more poison around the world? Or do you not want that to happen? Now, every sovereign nation and every head of state can simply quote Article 61 in the International Health Regulations, write a letter to the WHO and say, "No, thank you, we reject the 2024 amendments to the International Health Regulations." That same sovereign leader can instruct the delegate to the WHO to object and not take part in the consensus and demand, a roll call vote and vote no, and your nation can simply not sign the agreement. Well, that's simple, but it's really hard to get them to comply with the wishes of the people. So the problem is not that the WHO is trying to take over the sovereignty of your country. The problem is that your leaders do not listen to the people. They're involved in corrupt agreements with other corporations and foundations and groups around the world, and they are not paying attention to what the people really want. They're doing what they want to do. And so the problem is internal. Your people, not just in your country, but in the United States as well, are being ignored by the leaders that you feel are supposed to represent you in these negotiations. So the problem is much closer to home than it is international. This is just a corrupt business deal that everyone wants to sign on to because they're going to profit from it.
And for the end, people for sure in Croatia, and I'm every day in social media, they don't trust to our government, health officials. There is a lack of confidence. What is your opinion in case of future pandemic, and in case that somebody from the same government, again, asking from us lockdowns, face masks, and also this, as I said, biological weapon injections, are there going to be compliance like before, or there will be rejection?
Well, unfortunately, I can't speak for everyone around the world. Everyone is unique and different. Unfortunately, the propaganda from the pharmaceutical industry and this, pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex, it is such a fake, but they are very good at frightening people. And so the fear that drives people to run to the doctor and do whatever the doctor says, if you're running to a doctor who is essentially just a salesperson for big pharma, you're going to be poisoned. Now, if you explore alternative ways to maintain your health, whether that is, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, naturopathy, homeopathy, herbalism, whatever it may be, you realize that what happened with COVID was not what they said it was. It was medical murder. It was hospital homicide. It was biological warfare that did the most harm. And the respiratory ailment that was out there was not much different than every other year. And so they trick you. They mess with your mind. And they will do it again and again and again, because a lot of people are very vulnerable to, when authorities say something, people believe them. And if you look back at what happened over the last 5 years, there's no reason to believe them again. They did not earn our, they lied to us over and over and over and over again. But unfortunately, many people still believe that their doctor knows better than they know about their own body. And so the responsibility falls upon the individual person to make their own unique decision. And, if you believe what they tell you on television, if you believe what, the medical establishment says everybody must do the same thing, you have to learn and find ways to keep your own health and take responsibility for your own health. My personal belief is that swallowing or injecting poison is not the pathway to health. And I'm the best person to determine whether or not I am healthy. And some test that tells me I have a dis-ease when I feel fine is completely and totally fraudulent. But yet many people fell for that story. And so we all need to get a little wiser, a little stronger, a little more courageous. And if they try to do it again, we have to band together, do what we can to find, the best information possible, and realize that we can't trust them because they lied to us for the past 5 years. It's very, very difficult to get good information, and it's only getting harder.
Thank you, James. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye. Evo, dragi narode, čuli ste sada da još uvijek imamo vremena da odbijemo čak i one International Health Regulations koje su donesene 1.7. prošle godine. Dakle, do sredine 7. mjeseca možemo još uvijek reći ne. Potpisivanje novog agreementa, ugovora, koji će se dogoditi između 19. i 27. svibnja, također još nam daje mogućnost da odbijemo. Ali kao što ste čuli, evo, i istu stvar čujem sa više strana, odgovornost je na našim autoritetima, dakle na političarima iz Hrvatske. Ne moraju ništa napraviti od onoga što im kažu, mogu samo odlučiti žele li sudjelovati u toj globalnoj poslovnoj organizaciji radi nečijeg profita ili ne. Ne radi se ovdje o zdravlju našem, niti o javnom zdravstvu, radi se o interesima. To je jedan veliki globalni poslovni model u kome će vaši porezni novci odlaziti ako vaša vlada po tom pitanju se složi i odluči sudjelovati u tome. Ja se nadam da sam vam malo više razjasnio ovu situaciju, a volio bi na kraju vam reći i moje dojmove vezane za zdravstvenu struku i znanost u cijelom svijetu, pa tako i u Hrvatskoj. Ono što je meni jasno, da su oni jako dobro znali što se događa u prošloj pandemiji. Također, jako dobro znaju i šteta koja je učinjena u prošloj pandemiji. Međutim, ovog trenutka njima je važnije da zaštite svoju struku, medicinsku i znanstvenu, nego da priznaju istinu. Nažalost, interes je ispred etike i morala. Dakle, opet ostajemo sami okrenuti sebi da odlučimo što ćemo sa vlastitim tijelom budućnosti, a nažalost ne možemo još uvijek vjerovati medicinskim i znanstvenim autoritetima jer su izdali povjerenje koje smo im unaprijed dali. Hvala lijepo na pažnji i uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodni.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijer, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi oni koji su